Hello everyone, my name is Julianne Griffith, and today I will be providing a brief history of special education, related court cases, and useful resources for parents and guardians. Before the 1970s, people with special needs and exceptionalities were considered outcasts, and a huge stigma was developed that affected the educational journey for many students. As early as 1890, special education programs focused on teaching vocational skills, social values, and in some instances, moral values. However, the quality of these programs heavily depended on monetary gain. As time went on, the stigma got worse, and people with special needs were often sent to institutions where they were malnourished, left in filth, and still received no education. Even with special needs advocates on the rise, these students were often excluded from schools because most of them felt it was too big of a hassle. In 1965, Congress enacted the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, otherwise known as ESEA, in the hopes of addressing the severe inequality of education opportunities for disadvantaged and underprivileged students. Then, in 1966, Congress amended this act in an effort to gain funding so that schools could initiate, expand, and improve their current programs and projects for the education of handicapped and special needs children. In 1970, Congress enacted the Education of Handicapped Act, also known as Public Law 91-230, to help encourage states to develop additional educational programs for individuals with disabilities. The 1970s was a decade of serious change for the educational rights of individuals with disabilities. Two court cases during this time were catalysts for change. The first case was Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children versus the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in which students with mental retardation were being excluded from public schools. The settlement of this case concluded that the educational placement of students must include a process for parental participation and appropriate means to resolve any disputes. The second case was Mills versus Board of Education of the District of Columbia, which involved the suspension, expulsion, and exclusion of children with disabilities in public schools. The primary defense was that there was insufficient funding for any special education programs and services. It was determined that they failed to provide publicly supported education and training, as well as the exclusion, suspension, and expulsion of these students without providing them with the due process of law. Congress launched an investigation in 1972, shortly after these cases, to check up on the status of students with disabilities, and found that many of them were not receiving the appropriate education that they deserved. In 1974, the Buckley Amendment, or now known as the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, was established. This act was put in place to ensure that parents have access to their child's educational records and to protect the privacy rights of parents and students by limiting the amount of people that had access to those files. In 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, also known as Public Law 94-142, was enacted and later renamed to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Congress reauthorized this act in 2004 so that students with disabilities and exceptionalities receive the appropriate education and to ensure that special education and related services were available and that the education can be done in the least restrictive environment. Today, schools offer much more opportunities for special education programs and services. There are many resources as well as information about certain disabilities and exceptionalities, advocacy groups for parents and students, and programs, resources, and services in those specific areas. In Washington State, the PAVE program, or Partnerships for Action, Voices for Empowerment, offers advocacy, information on how to understand and develop the IEP plan and its process, in addition to support and training for families, individuals, and children affected by disabilities. On the district websites, parents can access information and request a special education liaison to help them through this process. The Washington State Department of Education offers resources and information on supportive services that are required by the state to be in schools and accessible, and additional links to district websites for more specific information in their residential areas, as well as specific education guides. The United States Department of Education is a national website that offers information, resources, and services available to students and families with special needs and exceptionalities. Additional information can also be found at your child's school websites or district offices.